Joining us, I am Debra Boggs, CEO of DNS Executive Career Management, and we are a firm that works with C-level and board-level leaders to prepare for, navigate, and land your next big thing. So as part of our work, we love to have conversations with executive recruiters who really have their finger on the pulse of what's going on in the market, the trends they're seeing in the market, things like that. And so I could not be more excited to be joined again with Ken Schmitt, a longtime friend of our firm and a partner at Ascentria Search Partners. Hi, Ken.
Hi, good morning, good afternoon, hello.
Yes, and for anyone who's joining us, pop in the chat where you're joining us from. Let us know where you're at. Ken and I are as far away from each other as possible to stay in the United States. I'm on the coast of Maine, and Ken, you're Southern California.
I am, yes, exactly, kind of North County, coastal San Diego.
Perfect. Yes, I'll be in San Diego later this year, April-ish.
Oh,
So
perfect. Yeah, good
yeah,
time to
hopefully.
visit. It's gorgeous.
Yeah.
It's always gorgeous here. We're very spoiled.
And April is a great time to leave the coast of Maine. It's not great here. It doesn't get great here till the end of May. So everyone, pop in the chat where you're joining us from. We'd love to see who's with us out there. Oh, Pittsburgh. Love it. Hi, Carrie Ann. My mom is from Pittsburgh, so I have a warm spot in my heart for that city. Oh, more San Diego. Love it. Portland, Maine. Carmen Poff is in Portland with me. She's our director of client success for anyone who reaches out and learns more about how we work, things like that. They always talk to Carmen. So we have a ton to talk about today, and I am so incredibly excited because you just launched your 2026 compensation report, and everyone wants to know about the compensation trends in executive hiring. So let's start with, what do you specialize in? And then let's dig into what you saw in this report.
Yeah, thanks. I appreciate that. And it's good to see everybody again as well. I'm a second time being on here live with you. So thanks for the invitation as well. Yeah, so our firm, Ascentria Search Partners, I was known for 17, almost 18 years as Turning Point Executive Search. I actually merged my firm with a longtime colleague back in May of last year. So same thing, just a matter of kind of expanding our offerings, and our clientele is a lot larger now as well. So as I mentioned earlier, I'm based here in San Diego with two of my other team members. My business partner, Sean, is based in Phoenix, and our clients are national. So we call ourselves a leadership recruiting firm. So it's not just C-suite positions, but it's really leadership in general. So whether that's manager, director, VP, or a C-suite title, it's primarily leadership type positions. We work across a pretty broad, spectrum in terms of sectors. Everything from, we have searches right now in fintech and in roofing and building products, a lot of engineering, construction company clients, but then also we have biotech, med device, you name it, pretty broad on the sector side. Where we actually concentrate and specialize is more company structure and size. So rather than going after the Teslas or the Lululemons or the JP Morgan Chases of the world and trying to recruit for them, our focus is really around that private company, middle market space. A lot of our clients are either founder led. That's about a third to almost 40%. And the other portion is actually private equity owned or private investor owned. Either the private equity firm brings us in, or the portfolio company itself, the operating company, brings us in to help bring new talent into the organization as well. So that's kind of how we specialize in that sector. And we do really everything. And my background is more C-suite operations, sales, and marketing recruiting. And my business partner, Sean, she's on the accounting and finance, real estate side, and some HR as well. So we cover, aside from the highly technical, scientific or IT technology positions, we cover pretty much everything else.
I love it. That's great. And you guys do such good work in your space. And I know that, that PE space, that PE back space has been really active. It's been one of the most active places we've seen in the market where our candidates are having great luck. And so I'd love to talk about what you're seeing. And so before we get to that, real quick, if anyone is interested in this new, I can't type and talk at the same time, and I always tell my candidates that too, the compensation report that Ken is going to talk a little bit about, we do have it in our upcoming newsletter. So if you're not a subscriber, reach out, let us know that. And Ken, let's talk a little bit about that. So tell me about your compensation report, what's included in here, and what were some of the big things you saw from the compensation side out of this? Because I know there were other trends as well, which I thought were fascinating. We'll get into.
Yeah. I keep talking about how it's a very fascinating time to be in the people business, as I'm sure you can attest to as well. There's just so many different, trends out there and things that are coming back that were, alive and well pre-COVID, then went dormant for a while and now are back again. And then obviously
Yeah.
new trends like AI in particular, right? We can talk about that. But yeah, so we do a very comprehensive guide twice a year. We publish it in January, and then we do an update, a mid-year update, typically in July, August. And,
Yeah.
it's people always say, well, Ken, how is compensation out there? How is the job market? And my answer is always, well, compared to what? Right. If you're looking at it compared to yesterday or last week or last month, that's one thing. Compared to 21 and 22, when it was the heyday of hiring and people were getting crazy 20, 30, 40% raises to change jobs, it's a different story. So I will say
Right.
that, the trends that we've seen over the last, let's call it 4 years, 4.5 years since COVID, right, is a cycle that we typically see play out over a 10-year period. So everything has been condensed. It's made every year more volatile than typical.
Mhm.
The swings have been bigger than usual rather than being kind of a gradual uptick or a gradual, kind of downturn. It's just
Yeah.
been this crazy spike up, crazy spike down. And then it's now starting to normalize a little bit. And we started to
Love to
see it
hear
kind of,
that.
yeah. We're kind of the middle-ish of last year. We started to see that trend start to normalize and get back to what was typical in 2017, 18, and 19 before COVID hit. So I will say
Mhm.
that's kind of the broader overarching trends out there. The compensation levels in general, the majority of the placements that we make are people that are currently employed or those that took a package, either early retirement or the company was purchased, those kinds of things. That's a lot of what we focus on. We obviously work with everybody, but that's a lot of the folks that we tend to place. So if you
Yeah.
look at the numbers that came out about a week or so ago, week and a half ago now, the average increase in compensation year over year for somebody staying in their current company and not changing companies was about 4.2%, 4.3%. The average increase, and again, this is across all sectors and across all functions and all regions, so it's a very broad number. But
Right.
those folks that are changing jobs, their average increase was 6.8%. So
Mm.
that's a broad number. Getting more
Yeah.
granular into what we focus on the leadership side, we're seeing again those trends go back to what they were pre-COVID. So usually for somebody that's changing jobs, currently employed, looking to make a job change for whatever reason, about a 15 to 18% bump in salary is pretty typical these days for most of those positions. A little
Right.
variability there, but that's pretty typical from what we see out there.
It's really interesting. And I'm glad you brought it up because this is something we talk to our candidates about all the time. Because again, we work on the candidate side when someone's looking to position themselves for the job market. And if they've been in a company for a long time, I say typically more than 7 years or so, you may have moved through, getting raises or promotions or moved in, lateral positions, things like that. But typically, we say that someone is probably paying what we call the loyalty tax of staying somewhere that long, right? You're not typically going to make market rate. And if you do make a move, you're going to move into something in a larger, in a larger salary band. Not always, but that's typically what we see. And,
Yeah.
and it looks
Yeah.
like the numbers are backing that up.
No, I agree completely. Yeah, exactly. And there's obviously, there's other reasons that people make job changes. And, again, back to the whole, how is the labor market? Another way to answer is that, well, it depends on which generation we're talking about. Right.
Yeah.
I'm Gen X, so I'm the smallest group, that's out there right now. One of,
Hmm.
four, now five different groups that are now or generations that are in the workforce. But Gen X is the smallest. Millennials are quite large, second only to baby boomers. But if you look, and so the desires or expectations around those generations are different
Yeah.
versus, if you look at obviously Gen Z and now Gen Alpha coming up as well. Gen Z and Gen Alpha, they are less focused on money and more around really kind of that balance.
Yeah.
They've seen their parents grow up in companies that laid them off. They've gone through COVID, obviously all the upheaval happening across the world right now, geopolitically and otherwise. There's so much going on. They want to feel good, if you will, about
Yeah.
the job that they're doing. They want to feel good about the boss they're working for and how he or she manages. and they want to feel good about the image and the causes even that their employer are actually supporting, which, for most other generations, everybody's like, what are you talking about? That doesn't matter, right? It's about
Right.
career progression. It's about your responsibility. It's about compensation. Who cares about what causes your employer are actually, supporting or not supporting? But that's the reality of these new generations. It's really important to them. I have a 28-year-old son, and I also have a 24-year-old son. And looking at them and talking to them about their jobs and what they value, it's very different than it's been for the other generations out there. So it's you have to, as an employer, but also as an employee, figure out what's important to me. Is compensation number one? And that's great. If it is, no problem at all. But you're probably not going to go into hospitality. They don't tend to pay the best, right? If you're focused around innovation, again, there are certain sectors that are much more known for innovation than others. We do a lot of work, as I mentioned before, in the construction engineering space, not really known as a very forward-looking, innovative, disruptive kind of an industry. And that's why private equity is buying a lot of companies in that space, for example, because it is ripe for innovation. But if you're a highly disruptive, innovative kind of individual, likes to do things different, kind of go against the grain, there are certain sectors that are going to pay you more and also pay you for your value because you are, you have that mindset. So yes, you definitely pay kind of that loyalty tax that you're talking about if you stay put, but there are multiple reasons to stay put beyond just the dollar signs also.
Yeah, all sorts of reasons why someone may stay in a role. And I think it's important, and especially if you're changing or you're growing or you're in a good place, I think there's probably a difference between staying somewhere because it feels safe and staying somewhere because you feel valued and things like that. But it's interesting that you bring up the different generations. So I hate this term, but I'm an elder millennial. And I feel like they could have done a little bit better for my weird age that is like right on the cusp.
I've heard the term cusper. Yeah, cusper. My oldest is a cusper between Gen Z and millennial at 28. So yeah, let's take the word elderly out of there. Elder out of there.
I like that. Yeah, I like cusper a lot better than elder millennial, but it is true.
I love it.
And in a company where I think just about everybody else on our team is Gen X or around there, I'm often the one forcing people to take time off.
Yeah.
And
exactly.
I'm talking to you, Carmen. But yeah, let's talk a little bit about some of the other trends you're seeing. And real quick, for anyone just joining us, we have Ken Schmitt, a partner at Accenture Search Partners, and he's really a leader in executive hiring and search and also for leadership roles. So if anyone is interested in learning more about Ken's compensation report, I'm posting it in our upcoming newsletter next week. So here is the link and the QR code to download to sign up for our newsletter. It goes out every other week, usually with free resources and information and things like Ken's report. So got this up here as I tee you up for the next question, which is tell us about some of the other trends you're seeing that I know you came out in this report a little bit, but let's talk about hybrid work first.
Yeah, it's such a great question. I think the overarching response is that I think it's normalized to a large extent. I think obviously in 2021, 22, it was all about working from home and let's make that happen. 23, 24, companies said, yeah, maybe we'll start bringing some people back. There's a lot of real estate that's being unused out there, companies that are locked into these long leases, beautiful spaces, wonderful amenities, and no one in the office to actually take advantage of them, right? So I think, my sense is, and again, our universe is the, privately held middle market space. A lot of what you read about in the media is really related to the big, very visible public companies and what they're doing with bringing people back to the office. So whether it's Starbucks, whether it's, Jamie Dimon at JP Morgan Chase, or a lot of the big companies are certainly bringing people back to the office. By and large, I would say 40-ish or so percent of companies, 50%, depending upon where you are in the country, have some kind of a hybrid. And doesn't mean that you're working from home 4 days a week. It means you probably have 1, maybe 2 days a week that you're working from home, the other days that you're in the office. Again, there are certain industries that are more likely to allow a fully remote situation, but overall, that's about 20-ish percent, give or take, low 20% of companies out there. and around 25-30% of overall companies, not just certain regions, but overall are requiring folks to be in the office full time 5 days a week. So there's still the largest portion is kind of that middle space, if you will. And there's some variability based on location. Being on the
Yeah.
coast is one thing versus being in the Midwest. We're doing some searches right now for a large company that's in the roofing space, building product space, and they're out in the Southeast. And this company is asking people to be in the office 5 days a week. Well, that's not a big deal out there. It's very much expected. Some of
Right.
these roles are logistics and accounting type roles, and so it makes a lot of sense. Those roles here on the West Coast or in Denver or Phoenix, Salt Lake City, those would largely be hybrid positions. So it does depend
That makes
a
sense.
little on location. But I would say, the number of jobs, if you read the results out there, all these surveys and analysis, the number of jobs that are posted that are offering fully remote is definitely decreased quite a bit compared to what it was a couple of years ago, for sure. But I would say,
Yeah.
for your audience out there, folks that are in job search mode, either active or passive, that can also be a negotiating tactic. If maybe the money is not quite as high as you would hope it to be, for example, for whatever reason, you can say, hey, will you let me work from home 1 day a week or 2 days a week? And it
Mhm.
doesn't really cost the company any actual hard dollars, so long as you can demonstrate how you're able to still do your job effectively
Right.
remotely. Whether that's through the use of certain technology and tools and platforms, whether it's just your management style in general. You've always been someone who's very, very open and accessible to talking to your team. But you've got to demonstrate as to why the company shouldn't be concerned about you working remotely even a couple days a week. But it has become a potential negotiating lever that candidates can certainly pull nowadays.
Right. That's so interesting. I'm glad you brought that up because that's sometimes we say to candidates that are frustrated by everything, saying, if they're just seeing jobs online, you know, fully in office, things like that. It's good to know that some of these things are negotiable, and that's what we typically tell people: is go through the process, and it can be on the table once you're the choice, once you're the candidate of
Right.
choice. You can talk about it. So
Yeah,
I'm glad to
exactly.
hear you say that. I'd love to know. I know we didn't talk about this offline, so a little bit of a curveball question, but I've been seeing in the news that less people are open to relocation now, especially as companies are asking for full in office. What are you
Definitely.
seeing from the recruitment side?
Yeah, no, I agree 100%. In fact, I was talking to a head of talent acquisition out in your area, actually in Maine, just yesterday afternoon, and she's in the medical device space. Yeah, and we were chatting, and I asked her that same question. I said, "Here's what we're seeing. Are you seeing the same thing?" And the answer was yes, definitely. And being in Maine, they're in a
Yeah,
spot where there's not a lot of medical device companies, clearly, right? And
right.
so that's challenging. But I would say the answer is yes. Compared to pre-COVID, when anybody that was kind of trying to ascend that corporate ladder, they knew that to get to that VP or EVP or C-suite title, they would probably have to relocate. And that was
Right.
the norm, expected. It was kind of just no big deal. No one really kind of gave it a second thought. Things have changed dramatically for a couple of reasons. A lot of people already moved from more expensive to less expensive cities in the country. A lot of the
Yep.
tier 3 cities are now tier 2, like Nashville and Salt Lake and all these places that people have left California and New York, honestly, to go to those states. So they've already spent time and money relocating and don't want to do it again. But also,
Hmm.
again, back to what I said before, balance is important for these folks, even at the senior levels, and they don't
Yeah.
want to uproot their families or their kids that are in school. They're willing to commute and to get a corporate apartment or whatever it might be, but to fully uproot, it's less common and
Yeah.
more a bigger ask these days than it was pre-COVID, without question.
We're definitely seeing that too from the candidate side. People are less interested in that, but fully fine to travel as much as needed,
Right.
things like that, to get an apartment, but not to take their whole family. We're definitely
Yeah.
seeing that as well.
Yeah. And I
Um,
think it depends on the situation. I think, candidates also have to be sensitive to the situation. If you're a turnaround expert, or you happen to be a candidate in a company situation where they're in turnaround mode, or they're in hyper growth mode, or they're trying
yeah,
to build out a team in the local market, it's tough for you to really justify and validate being fully remote, right? You
yeah.
need to be there on site to really help kind of develop, if you will, or recreate the right kind of a attitude, but also culture in the environment. If you're not there in the environment, But
Right.
other situations, maybe it's not quite as much of a hot button. But I think candidates need to also be sensitive and aware of that situation and be willing to be flexible and bend. I've been recruiting now. This is my 29th year, and the list of levers, if you will, or priorities that candidates have not changed over those nearly 3 decades. It's
Wow.
usually one of 5 things. It's location, it's title / upward mobility, it's compensation, right? It's benefits, and then it's also the culture and the environment of the company. Those 5 things. What changes from season to season really is really the ordering of those 5 things. And
Yes.
it changes for each individual. And none of them it's not better or worse or right or wrong to say that my number one lever and key component is compensation. That's fine. But like I
Right.
said before, be aware of that. And then also make sure that you're applying to and looking at jobs and networking with companies that are relevant for that situation where they're going to pay you more than you might get elsewhere.
Yeah, you bring up such a good point because when we talk to potential candidates, because again, we're on the candidate side, so helping people through that job search process for anyone just joining us. When people call us, either myself or Carmen Poff on our team will have that initial conversation. And the questions we ask really are, what does that ideal next role look like for you? And that can mean, company type, function, industry, things like that. But also, what is your flexibility? What is your, where are you going to live? Things like that. And then the second thing we ask is, what does ideal compensation look like? And we ask those 2 questions for exactly that reason, right? What you want and how much you want to be paid for it determines how you go about your job search and the strategy that you do and who you focus on and things like that. It doesn't happen by accident. And those are the first 2 questions we ask because you have to get focused
Yeah.
or you're just kind of, throwing darts at a wall. So
I agree. Yeah, for sure. And I mean, we always say there's many different ways to get to that number that you're looking for. And I think a lot of companies don't think about flexibility. And if the company's target is, let's say, $200,000 salary, and
mhm,
you as a candidate are looking for 2.25, there's different ways to get to that number, right? There's different
right.
bonus levers. You can also say, all right, I'm willing to come in at 200,000, but I want a review at 6 months. And at that
Yep.
review, if I have hit all these levers or all of these, goals that we have set up in the beginning, then, I want to be considered for a bump in pay. So, you have that commitment. It's a two-way street. You give a little
Right.
as a candidate in the beginning. They give a little as the employer once they see that you can prove that you're worth that extra $25,000. There are different ways to get to that point. In the middle market
Yeah.
space, private equity and investor-owned companies, they tend to have slightly lower salaries but much higher upside variability, including
Yep.
equity. The larger companies out there that are public tend to have a higher salary, but a lower bonus potential. So just
Mhm.
knowing, kind of what the dynamics are of the type of company that you're targeting, that's also really important.
Yeah, it really is because some candidates will say to me, well, I have to have X and such in base salary because of whatever, don't care. Um, or some will say, base salary doesn't really matter. I'm more interested in the upside and the potential for equity,
Right.
things like that. So, everyone's in a different place. And that's why we ask, right? It's not just, especially when you get into these leadership level roles, compensation can be made up of so much that it's
Yes.
not just a straight question.
Very true.
So I know we have about 7 minutes left, and I have 2 really important questions for you. I'd like to
Sure.
dig into a little more. Let's talk about, you'd mentioned offline a big push for needing to show your cross-functional skills
Mm.
now in today's market versus just being siloed in your function. So talk a little bit about what you're seeing.
Yeah, it's a trend I've seen even before COVID started. I started to see the beginnings of this, but it's really kind of accelerated. Companies used to operate in such a silo fashion, and we do a lot of work with sales and marketing operations, right? So that's really
Mhm.
3 very good examples. It used to be that it was a very linear line between those 3 areas, right? Where
Yeah.
marketing would come in, do all their marketing campaigns, try to build that funnel, if you will. The funnel would get full, leads come in, then marketing stops, and then sales takes over, and then revenue comes in, da 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 da, right? They secure clients, and then operations then finds ways to make things work and streamline. So it's very linear, kind of start stop start stop. These days, not everybody, the companies that are doing better, the companies
Yeah.
that understand the new dynamic of working, see it as much more of a circular relationship.
Yeah.
Everybody's involved with everything. right? Marketing has to talk to sales in the very beginning and vice versa. Operations and finance needs to understand, okay, why do we need a bigger budget, if you will? How can we streamline this particular operation or this function? How can we improve our workflow? And I know this is a much bigger discussion, but AI is a part of all of that. How can
Yes.
we as an organization, how can we, and also should we as an organization use AI, especially generative AI, whether it's Gemini or Copilot or ChatGPT, whatever, how can we use that, and should we use it to help streamline our operations, to make things more efficient? And it's going to, and already has obviously disrupted jobs, but I think in the long run, it'll create more jobs than get eliminated. There'll be different kinds of positions, and it'll free up leaders to be more strategic, and they'll be able to relegate, the mundane routine tasks to AI. So, it's really important to understand how that circular relationship, comes into play around AI as well. But yeah, so you as a candidate, as a job seeker, the more that you can demonstrate your experience, ability, and passion for being collaborative, working
Yeah.
across departments, talking the language, speaking the language of the other teams, right? If you're in sales, don't just talk about, numbers and sales and pipeline, da da da. You got to understand what's the relevant jargon and language that finance and operations is using, and vice versa. So it's really important to do that. And that's one of the things I probably see less often than I should on resumes, is that
Interesting.
resumes are still very linear. They're written the same way they were written for the last 30 years that I've been in the
Yeah.
business, right? But the two things that I see missing the most are any mention of human capital in the resume.
Yeah.
Maybe you were known as the trainer, and people came into your department, did a great job, and then rotated out somewhere else. Maybe you
Yeah.
built the team, you retooled the team, you decreased turnover, whatever it was around human capital. And the same thing goes for being collaborative and working across different departments. Showcase on your resume and LinkedIn profile how you have done that. What's your approach? How do you go about it? Why is it that operations comes to you with questions? How do you build that rapport and that trust factor and that credibility? So those are things that I think should be more prominent in resumes compared to what I see today.
I'm so glad you mentioned that, because you're right. I think that people leadership piece, and working with humans is something that gets left out. I think a lot of times, even for senior leaders, I see it on C-level resumes where they run 400-person teams, but nothing about team leadership shows up, right?
Right. Exactly.
And your note about different functions needing to be cross-functional collaborators, especially right now, makes so much sense. One of our other recruitment partners, David Honig in the Boston area, focuses on executive marketing roles, said the same thing recently, that to be a marketing leader right now, you really have to talk about how you drive revenue by collaborating with sales.
Right.
And that's so important. It can't just be marketing in a silo anymore. It really has to be how you're collaborating and driving revenue. So in the, say, minute and a half we have left, I'd love to talk about AI. So I know we could talk about this all day, and this is probably a whole separate conversation, but tell us about what you're seeing in terms of how candidates need to stand out with the use of AI.
Yeah, that's a good question. So, where do I start? So I would say that, that there's two different schools of thought. Do you embrace AI and say, you know what, it's here, it's not going anywhere. I've got to figure out how to learn it, how to deploy it, and then how to present myself as somebody who can do both those things. The other camp says, you know what, AI is horrible. Robots are taking over. It's going to be, Skynet before we know it, and Terminator days. And those are the folks that stick their head in the sand, and they're going to be passed over, unfortunately. So you've got to find ways to embrace it, and not use it as a crutch or as a way to skirt your responsibilities, but to say, here's what I'm doing with AI. Here's how I'm incorporating technology into what I do. Here's how I've, on the marketing side, for example, rather than saying, no, we don't use AI, it's only humans that write all this content. That's not really true for most companies anymore. And that's okay.
Right.
Even for my company, right? We use AI to help enhance the work that we do. Our compensation guide, that used to take us, God, a week and a half, 2 weeks for writing all that content and all that copy and everything else. Nowadays, we can do it much more streamlined. It takes us, 3 or 4 days, but then it frees us up to look at the trends out there, do a lot of more time, spend more time on research, if you will, to make sure the trends that we are, reflecting in the guide make sense for us. So There are ways to do that. And getting
Wow.
certified in AI and Gen AI or what have you is a good way to go also, especially if you have the time, if you're not working right now. But also asking for projects that you can do in your current company if you're currently working that
That's a
might
great idea.
incorporate new technologies, whether it's AI or something else out there. And on the flip side, I would say, I know we're pressed for time, but on the flip side, as a job seeker, the important thing right now is that you should not be relying solely on AI to write your resume. There are so many resumes that I see now that use the same terminology, right?
Mm,
Results oriented, dynamic, all these words that Gen AI uses. Nobody is asking it to use different terminology. You've got to do that. You've got to take what comes back from AI with your resume, massage it, personalize it, tweak it. Don't take that as being gospel, and make sure that it actually looks differentiated, not using the same cliche type phrases that everybody uses out there.
oh, I'm so glad you brought this up. So as a recruiter, you can tell when a resume is largely written by AI.
Definitely. Yeah, without
Mm,
question. Without question. Yeah. And it's, again, it just sounds so I don't know, cliche is the term I'm coming with, but it's cliche to say cliche, right? But it is all these terms that just everybody uses, and there's no
right.
differentiation, there's no difference there. So it comes down to how effective are you at writing prompts. It's because
Mm,
you'll get the results back that you ask for, but if you don't
right.
ask the right question in Gen AI, you are not going to get the right result, and so your resume is going to come across as being very generic. And so you've got
Mhm.
to find ways to really kind of spruce it up a little bit. And you can ask, once you get your first resume version back, you can say, rewrite this using different terminology. And you can say, don't use quote results oriented. Don't use, dynamic
Yes.
leader. You can,
Please, everyone,
yeah,
don't use results oriented. No
yeah.
one got to be in a leadership
Nobody's
role by
not.
not
Yeah.
being
Right.
results oriented. That's just a given. We
Like
talk
the old
about what's
days
a
of being a
differentiator.
people person. No one's not a people person, or if they are, they're not going to tell you about it. That's for sure. So yeah, yeah. So you got to find
You're right.
ways
I
to
haven't
really
seen people person in
personalize
a
it.
long time
Yeah,
for a good
exactly.
reason.
I'm a people person. Oh, that's great. That tells me nothing. So yeah, so finding ways to really, again, personalize it, customize it, get away from those kind of, those cliche phrases, if you will, and make sure that you're talking about what you've done as a human being, the things that
Mhm.
only you could do, right? Managing your team, mentoring your team, again, decreasing turnover, the things that we've mentioned before. Those
Yeah,
are things that AI cannot do today. Hopefully it'll never do it, but at least today it cannot. And so
right.
you've got to really showcase what you've done as a human being, which is weird to say, but that's where we are.
But it is. It, it is weird to say and also necessary.
Yes, right, right.
That, that's so interesting. Well, I could talk to you all day about this and all sorts of other things. We have come to the top of our time. I'm going to pop in on the screen one more time. If anyone wants to dig in further to Ken's 2026 compensation report, sign up for our newsletter. I'll be doing a deep dive on it in next week's newsletter. So you can sign up there, and also you can download it directly. Carmen will pop in the chat the link to download it directly from Ken's firm. Either way, we are really excited to dig in deeper because it is an incredibly valuable resource. And I appreciate so much that you've made it available to us and our audience. Thanks for joining us, Ken.
Of course. Thanks so much. Have a good day.